Well, hello, Energy Rogue Nation. Welcome back to another weather discussion. Thank you all so much for tuning in. This today is going to be a very brief tropical update, and the last time that I said brief, that video was about 10 to 15 minutes, and I told you guys that my brief videos are about 10 to 15 minutes, but today is going to be even shorter than that. I do have a lot going on today, and my schedule's pretty tight, but I did want to give you a quick update on the tropics. I don't know if you guys have heard about this, but the National Hurricane Center is watching this area of development over the next several days. It's an area of convection, which I'll show you here in just a moment, that's just off the coast of the Lesser Antilles and is expected to make somewhat of a northwest trajectory, especially towards Florida and the Carolinas. Now, one thing I want to note is that the probability of this developing into a tropical depression slash storm right now is 60%. Now, what's important about this is that when we're forecasting 60% probability, of course, number one, there is the 40% chance that it doesn't form. But most importantly, this is not formation within, say, the next 24 to 48 hours. We're really talking about the next several days. What this system has actually been battling, and this is something that we've been talking about quite a bit here on the channel, and let me actually go ahead and pull up College New page. I think you guys can tell by now that this is a very impromptu video, but I am not going to be around it all tonight, so I want to get this out as soon as possible to get ahead of the news cycle. So let's head on over to our long wave IR, and we will take a look here at the Atlantic Basin. But if you remember from our conversations in the last few days with the tropics, we've been talking about the fact that really throughout the month of July, we've had this Sahara dust plume that's really been ramped up across much of the Atlantic Basin. We hadn't seen much convection. That is starting to wake up a little bit, but for the most part, the Atlantic Basin is rather quiet in comparison to what we saw a few weeks ago with Major Hurricane Beryl. The system of concern is actually this area of convection that I circled here in pink. Let me go ahead and loop this for you. And what you might be quite surprised by is there really isn't much deep convection here. And you're probably thinking, well, Brendan, so why do we have such high probability for potential tropical storm development over the next several days for something that kind of looks like crap? It's because right now we're not expecting short-term development. And that's because, remember, we still have a nice plume of Saharan dust that this thing is eating up. Not just that, but it's in an area of about 10 to 20 knot bulk shear, which is not very favorable for rapid development. What concerns a lot of us forecasters with this system and why this sort of sprouted up out of nowhere is because, for the most part, this band of convection has held up quite well. And you can certainly see a circulation. It might be kind of hard to see on the global, but if we were to zoom in, hypothetically, you would see a low pressure here with some convection circulating around the low. So it's concerning because it sort of sprouted up out of nowhere, and also this convection has been pretty resilient to a lot of the Saharan dust plume and also the unfavorable shear environment that it's in. That's concerning because as this storm, or as this system continues to mitigate off to the west-northwest, it's going to be moving away from the Saharan dust plume because the magnitude of the Saharan dust really drops off as soon as you get west of the Lesser Antilles. That's number one. And number two, as we continue to propagate that storm westward, it's going to be dealing with less shear and also increasing sea surface temperatures. All of those ingredients are certainly conducive for tropical development. Now, as you saw on the National Hurricane Center website, and this is, by the way, a wonderful resource that I certainly will second with what they're saying, but this is essentially the uncertain path, right? And that takes us mostly at the moment to Florida and the coastal Carolinas. So as it stands right now, it is sort of an Atlantic system. And unless if something changes, which weather can, I expect it to be mostly an Atlantic system. And the reason why is because we have to remember the storm ingredients we look towards the Atlantic Basin for, just like what we talked about. But if we really want to know where the storm is going to land and where it's going to stick in the United States, you have to look at the actual weather pattern in the lower 48. because in that case, our jet stream is going to be what dictates whether or not that storm makes landfall along the coast of the Atlantic, if it goes just out to sea, if it mitigates further west and does pretty much a diagonal towards the Gulf. That is all contingent really on lower 48 jet pattern. I will say this, and what I'm about to say, I really don't want you to take much credence in right now. The models are all over the place with this system. For example, there is still not much agreement on how this storm will intensify once it gets past the Lesser Antilles. There is, for example, the GFS. If we were to just invest completely into that solution, it has this developing into a low-end hurricane up the coast of Florida and then does a weird loop-de-loop back to Texas, essentially hitting Freeport. So it does some very bizarre things. And so I don't want to really touch on that. And it's not meant to give you guys any fear that, there's going to be another direct impact to Freeport, because that is way far out, number one. And number two, from what I've seen in the model suite, that is the only one that is showing it. And quite frankly, I think that scenario is a complete outlier. It's just a very bizarre pathing. Not to say that it isn't possible, but if we were to put probabilities behind what I just said, I'd put it at less than 10%. That's a very kind of wonky movement and progression of a system based upon the pattern in the United States. So, if there's anything you just took away from that diatribe, it's one thing, and that is right now, the confidence increases on the development of this system into potentially a tropical depression, tropical storm. However, as you can tell by this uncertainty swath, it's really anybody's guess, because right now, the model guidance is not consistent on either the strengthening of the system or the pathing of it. Why the probs are so high really has less to do with the model confidence and has more to do with the nowcasting, what we can actually observe. And forecasters are making the conclusions, especially myself, look, if this storm moves west into a much more favorable environment, then arguably you will see some intensification. But the model suite that we have is just so all over the place with it. So the purpose of me bringing up this system is to make you aware of it. Just like what we did with Beryl about a week and a half out before it made landfall in Houston. This is just to make you aware that we're watching it and we're monitoring it. And this is something that we're going to continue to track over the next, what will be several days. Because I do expect, because of how resilient this low pressure has been, which has been quite surprising to me, it's going to likely hold together and potentially become our next tropical storm once we get to, especially places like Cuba and Puerto Rico and even much of Florida. So watch this space very closely. We'll continue to monitor it on our end and update accordingly. And also in the Eastern Pacific, a much different situation, right? We talked about the East Pac in this past tropical video, and my argument was, aside from that one little system we're seeing in the Atlantic should remain quiet for the most part, at least through middle of August. But what is going to be rather active is this swath, the Eastern Pacific. Right now, we have very high probability for some tropical development, 70% chance in the next 7 days, 90% chance in the next 7 days for these two systems, and then out towards 15 degrees north latitude and 130 degrees west longitude. 40% chance of cyclone formation in the next 7 days. This is going to be an area to watch, and if you want more information on that, you can check out my tropical weather video from a few days ago. I actually dive a little bit deeper as to why we're seeing more activity in the Eastern Pacific than we are in the Atlantic. But I do expect this to really ramp up here, especially over the next few days. We're going to see some rapid intensification, especially with these two systems as they move off to the west-northwest as well. Now, these aren't going to be impacting land, but in that same video that I'm alluding to, I also show you some shipping lanes, some major shipping lanes that are actually in the vicinity of a lot of these tropical developments. So, for those of you that trade anything that is commoditized or transported through shipping, and that's something that interests you, I know this may not be getting headlines because these are all storms that are going out to sea, but if shipping concerns you and you're doing some trading relating to that kind of thing, or any asset that's being shipped from, say, here to Japan or to East Asia, watch this space. There certainly is going to be likely some disruptions. due to a lot of this tropical activity that's going to be developing. And it is inevitable that we see some hurricanes develop out of either one or both of these systems circled here in red. So be very mindful. We got some activity picking up. The Pacific, of course, is really the main event right now. But Eastern Atlantic and the Atlantic Basin is starting to get pretty interesting. Although still not as active as a lot of forecasters are looking towards in the back half of this hurricane season, this system is proving to be quite resilient, and it's going to be very interesting to see how this system progresses over the next several days. So watch that space. And by the way, I did not talk about temperatures today. We did not go into the heat that is expected out in the Four Corners and West Coast, as well as much of the western half of the United States, west of the Central Divide. So if you have any questions on that or need clarifications or want to know what the temperatures look like for the rest of the week and the general pattern for the lower 48, message me in the Discord below between now and Thursday. I'm happy to get to any weather questions that you have. Other than that, stay safe, have a great rest of your Tuesday, and we'll see you back here on Thursday with another weather update. Take care.